Welcome to another Office Revenge Hub story.
They thought I was replaceable. They learned the hard way that some people are irreplaceable, and by the time they figured it out, it was too late. My name is Daniel, and I was the operations manager at a logistics company called FreightCore Solutions. I worked there for 9 years, 9 years of building systems, solving problems, and keeping everything running smoothly while everyone else got the credit. I was the person who made sure shipments arrived on time, that clients stayed happy, that crises got resolved before they became disasters. I was invisible until I wasn't there anymore. FreightCore was a mid-sized freight forwarding company based in Atlanta, handling imports and exports for manufacturing clients across the Southeast. When I started, we were processing about 200 shipments a month. By my 9th year, we were handling over 1,500. That growth didn't happen by accident. It happened because I built the systems that made it possible. I managed a team of 18 people across dispatch, in tracking and customer service. I created the workflow protocols that kept our operations efficient. I maintained relationships with carriers, customs brokers, and warehouse partners. I was the person who answered calls at 2 a.m. when a shipment was stuck at the port. I was the person who negotiated rates, resolved disputes, and figured out how to move freight when hurricanes shut down major ports. My boss was a guy named Kevin Marsh, the VP of Operations. Kevin had been with the company for 12 years, brought in by the founder before the company really took off. He was good at presentations and board meetings, at talking about strategy and growth projections, but he didn't understand operations. Not really. He didn't know how the systems worked, how the relationships functioned, how we actually got things done day to day. That was fine when things were going well. Kevin could take credit for the smooth operations, and I could focus on actually running things. It was an unspoken arrangement that worked for both of us. Or so I thought. The company started changing about 2 years before everything fell apart. We got new investors, private equity people who wanted aggressive growth and improved margins. They brought in consultants who walked around with clipboards, asking questions about efficiency and overhead. They talked about optimization and scalability like those words meant something concrete. The founder, a man named Robert Chen, who'd built the company from nothing, started taking a back seat. He was nearing retirement and seemed tired of fighting with the new investors about strategy. The private equity people installed their own CFO, a woman named Diana Sterling, who'd never worked in logistics and didn't seem interested in learning. Diana's focus was purely financial. She looked at spreadsheets and saw costs she wanted to cut, inefficiencies she wanted to eliminate. She didn't understand that some costs were investments, that some inefficiencies were actually redundancies that prevented disasters, that relationships and institutional knowledge mattered more than algorithmic optimization. Kevin aligned himself with Diana immediately. He started speaking her language, talking about restructuring and modernization. He brought her to operations meetings and let her make suggestions about things she didn't understand. I pushed back politely, explaining why certain processes existed, why certain costs were necessary, why certain relationships required maintenance. Diana didn't like being told she was wrong. Neither did Kevin. The shift happened gradually. Kevin started excluding me from strategy meetings. He stopped asking for my input on major decisions. He hired an external consultant to analyze our operations and make recommendations, someone who spent 3 weeks asking basic questions and then produced a report suggesting we could reduce headcount by 20% and automate most of our tracking systems. I read the report and saw immediately that it was garbage. The consultant had no understanding of the complexity of international logistics, the unpredictability of shipping, the importance of experienced staff who could solve problems in real time. The automation suggestions were especially absurd, recommending systems that worked fine for domestic package delivery but couldn't handle the complexity of customs, clearance, multimodal freight, and international regulations. I wrote a detailed response, explaining why the recommendations were flawed and potentially catastrophic. I sent it to Kevin expecting a conversation. Instead, I got a brief email thanking me for my feedback and telling me the company had decided to move forward with the consultant's plan. That's when I knew I was in trouble. Over the next 3 months, Kevin implemented the consultant's recommendations. He reduced our dispatch team from 8 people to 5, letting go of 3 experienced dispatchers and replacing them with lower-paid junior staff. He purchased an automated tracking system that was supposed to reduce the need for manual monitoring. He renegotiated some of our carrier contracts, prioritizing price over reliability. I watched everything I'd built start to fracture. The junior dispatchers didn't have the experience to handle complex routing problems. The automated tracking system couldn't account for the hundreds of exceptions that occurred in international freight. The new carrier contracts saved money on paper, but resulted in more delays and damaged shipments. Client complaints increased, shipments started missing deadlines. Problems that I used to catch and fix proactively now became emergencies that required firefighting. I was working 70-hour weeks trying to hold everything together, compensating for the deficiencies Kevin had introduced, and Kevin blamed me for the problems. In meetings, he suggested that operations were struggling because of resistance to change, because certain people were too attached to old ways of doing things. He never said my name, but everyone knew who he meant. Diana echoed his concerns, talking about the need for fresh perspectives and modern approaches. I should have seen it coming. I should have started looking for another job. But I was loyal. I believed in the company Robert had built. I thought if I could just keep things running smoothly, prove the consultant's recommendations were wrong, eventually Kevin and Diana would realize their mistake. I was naive. The end came on a Thursday morning in March. Kevin called me into his office at 8 a.m. Diana was there, along with someone from HR named Patricia. The setup was unmistakable. "Daniel, thank you for coming," Kevin began. "We wanted to talk to you about the future of operations." "Okay," Diana spoke next. "We've been reviewing the operations department's performance over the last quarter. While we appreciate your years of service, we believe the department needs new leadership with a more modern approach to logistics management." The words took a moment to process. "You're replacing me?" "We're restructuring the operations leadership," Kevin said. "Your position is being eliminated. We're creating a new role, Director of Logistics Innovation, and we've hired someone from outside the company to fill it." "Someone from outside?" I repeated the words slowly. "You're hiring someone who doesn't know our systems, our clients, our processes?" "Someone with experience at larger, more sophisticated operations," Diana interjected. "Someone who can bring best practices from industry leaders." "Who?" Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "His name is Brad Stevenson. He was a regional manager at DHL. He starts next week." I knew the type. Big company background, impressive title, no understanding of how mid-sized logistics companies actually operated. Someone who'd managed one small piece of a massive corporate machine and thought that experience would translate to running an entire operation. "What about my team?" I asked. "Your team will report to Brad," Kevin said. "Yeah, we're confident he'll be able to leverage their capabilities effectively." Leverage their capabilities. Corporate speak for having no idea how any of this actually worked. "When is my last day?" "Today, actually," Patricia said. "We'll need you to spend this morning transitioning any critical information to Kevin, and then we'll walk you through your severance package." "Today." They were firing me immediately, giving me no time to properly transition 9 years of institutional knowledge, no time to prepare my team, no time to document the 1,000 small things I did that kept operations running. "This is a mistake," I said quietly. Diana's expression hardened. That's exactly the kind of attitude that's been holding this department back. Resistance to change, unwillingness to adapt. The logistics industry is evolving, and Freight Corps needs to evolve with it. I looked at Kevin. "You know this is wrong. You know what's going to happen when I leave." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I think Brad will bring valuable perspective." I realized then that Kevin had never understood what I did. He'd taken credit for my work for so long that he'd convinced himself he was responsible for Operation success. He genuinely believed that my role was simple, that anyone with logistics experience could step in and do it. He was about to learn otherwise. I spent the morning writing a transition document that I knew was inadequate. 9 years of knowledge couldn't be captured in a few pages, but I tried. I documented our major client relationships, the critical carrier contacts, the common problems and their solutions, and the quirks of our systems that required specific handling. Kevin skimmed it and thanked me. He had no idea what he was losing. Patricia walked me through the severance package. 16 weeks of pay, continuation of benefits for 4 months, a neutral reference, standard stuff. I signed the papers mechanically, feeling numb. My team was devastated. I'd hired most of them, trained them, mentored them. They knew this was a disaster. Jessica, my senior dispatcher, actually started crying. Marcus, my best customer service rep, looked furious. They wanted to quit in protest, but I talked them out of it. They had families, mortgages, lives that depended on their paychecks. I wouldn't let them sacrifice their stability for loyalty to me. I packed my office quietly. 9 years fit into 2 boxes and a bag. Photos of my wife and kids, near a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Manager" that my team had given me as a joke. Certificates and awards I'd never bothered to hang on the walls. A stress ball shaped like a freight container. I walked out at noon on a Thursday and my career at Freight Corps was over. My wife, Angela, was shocked when I came home early. "What happened?" I told her everything. She listened, getting angrier as the story progressed. When I finished, she hugged me tight. "They're idiots. They'll regret this." "Maybe. Definitely. You are holding that place together. They'll fall apart without you." I wanted to believe her, but I was too numb to feel anything. Not anger, not vindication, just emptiness. The first few days, I didn't do much. I cleaned the garage. I fixed a leaky faucet I'd been putting off for months. I took the kids to school and picked them up, enjoying the novelty of being present for their daily routines. Angela tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes. We had savings, but not unlimited savings. I needed to find another job. I started applying, but my heart wasn't in it. I sent out resumes mechanically, going through the motions. I got some responses, a few interviews, but nothing felt right. Nothing felt like the place I'd spent 9 years building. I started hearing things through my former team members, small things at first. Jessica texted me that Brad had arrived and was already making changes nobody understood. Marcus called to tell me Brad had yelled at a customer service rep for following a protocol I'd established, calling it outdated. Week 2, the first major shipment got stuck. A client's time-sensitive manufacturing equipment was held up at customs because Brad didn't understand the specific documentation requirements for industrial machinery, the kind of thing I would have caught and prevented. Jessica tried to explain the issue, but Brad dismissed her concerns. The equipment sat at the port for 4 extra days, missing the client's production deadline. The client was furious. Week 3, one of our major carrier relationships fractured. Brad had tried to renegotiate rates using a heavy-handed approach that insulted a carrier rep I'd worked with for 7 years. The carrier stopped prioritizing our shipments, and several deliveries were delayed. Brad blamed the carrier, not understanding that relationships in logistics matter more than contracts. Week 4, 2 senior team members quit, so Jessica gave notice first, unwilling to watch Brad destroy everything we'd built. Marcus followed 3 days later. Both of them reached out to me, asking if I'd found anything yet, hinting they'd follow me anywhere. I hadn't found anything, I'd barely looked, because a different idea was forming. The turning point came during a late-night conversation with Angela. We were sitting on our back porch, and I was telling her about the latest disaster at Freight Corps. A major client, one I'd personally managed for 6 years, was threatening to leave because of repeated service failures. "Why don't you reach out to them?" Angela asked. "What do you mean?" "If they're unhappy with Freight Corps, maybe they'd work with you directly. You could start your own company." The idea stopped me cold. Start my own logistics company? Why not? You know the business better than anyone. You have the relationships. You have the expertise. Freight Corps is falling apart because you're not there. Maybe that's an opportunity. I'd never considered entrepreneurship. I'd always been an employee, someone who built things for other people. The idea of building something for myself was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I don't have the capital. Starting a freight forwarding company requires licenses, insurance, carrier agreements, office space. We have savings. We could take out a small business loan. You could start small, work from home initially, build up gradually. I thought about it for a long time. Then I started researching. Starting a freight forwarding business was complex, but not impossible. I'd need a Federal Maritime Commission license, cargo insurance, and a customs broker partnership. I'd need to register as a business entity, set up accounting systems, and establish carrier contracts. But I knew all of this. I'd been doing this work for 9 years. I just hadn't been doing it for myself. I spent a week building a business plan. I projected conservative revenue based on capturing just a handful of Freight Corps clients I'd personally built relationships with over the years. I calculated startup costs and operating expenses. The numbers worked if I stayed lean, if I focused on service quality over rapid growth, if I leveraged my knowledge and relationships rather than trying to compete on price. I named the company Meridian Logistics. I filed the paperwork. I applied for the necessary licenses. I took out a small business loan, using our house as collateral, a risk that terrified Angela, but that she supported anyway. Then I started making calls. I reached out to former colleagues in the industry, people I'd worked with at carrier companies, customs brokerages, warehouse operations. I told them I was starting my own business and asked if they'd be willing to work with me. Almost everyone said yes. These were relationships I'd built over years, favors I'd done, problems I'd solved. People remembered. Then I reached out to clients. Carefully, selectively, the ones I knew were unhappy with Freight Corps, the ones I'd personally managed, the ones who'd trusted me more than they'd trusted the company. The first was a manufacturing company called TechFab Industries. I'd managed their logistics for 5 years, handled countless emergency shipments, saved them from disasters they never knew about. So their operations manager, a woman named Diane, took my call immediately. "Daniel, thank God, what happened to you?" I explained that I'd left Freight Corps and was starting my own company. "I know you've been having issues with service lately. I wanted to see if you'd be interested in working with Meridian Logistics." "Are you kidding? We've been a disaster since you left. Brad has no idea what he's doing. We had a shipment stuck in customs for a week last month. We're actively looking for alternatives. I can handle your logistics the same way I always did. Same service, same attention to detail, just a different company name. Send me a proposal. We're ready to switch. I sent the proposal that day. TechFab signed a contract within a week. The second client was easier, a medical device distributor who'd been threatening to leave FreightCor after multiple delivery failures. They switched to Meridian immediately. The third client reached out to me. They'd heard through the industry grapevine that I'd started my own company, and they wanted in. Within 6 weeks, I had 5 clients and enough revenue to cover my operating costs. Within 3 months, I had 12 clients. Some were former FreightCor accounts. Some were companies I'd never worked with, but who'd heard about my reputation. Jessica called me 2 months after I started Meridian. Are you hiring? You want to leave FreightCor? I already left 2 weeks ago. Brad is incompetent, and I can't watch that disaster anymore. I heard you're doing well. I want to be part of it. I hired Jessica as my first employee. Then I hired Marcus. Then I hired 2 of the other team members who'd left FreightCor. We worked from a small office space I rented, nothing fancy, just room for desks and computers. But we operated like a well-oiled machine because we'd worked together for years. We knew each other's strengths, trusted each other's judgment, and cared about doing the work right. We focused on service quality above everything else. We answered calls at all hours. We solved problems proactively. We treated clients like partners rather than revenue sources. Word spread. We started winning clients we'd never targeted. Companies who were fed up with larger competitors' mediocre service. 6 months after starting Meridian, I ran into Kevin at an industry event. He looked terrible, stressed and exhausted in a way I remembered from my worst days at FreightCor. He tried to avoid me, but we ended up in the same conversation circle. Daniel, he said stiffly, I heard you started your own company. I did, Meridian Logistics. We're doing well. Good for you. His tone suggested otherwise. Someone else in the circle asked Kevin how things were going at FreightCor. He gave a vague, positive answer about exciting changes and new directions. But I'd heard the reality through the grapevine. FreightCor had lost over 30% of their client base in 6 months. Brad had been fired after 4 months and replaced with someone else who was also struggling. The company was hemorrhaging money and reputation. Kevin excused himself quickly. As he walked away, I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no vindication, just mild pity for someone who destroyed something good through arrogance and ignorance. 8 months after starting Meridian, we got a call from TechFab Industries. Diane wanted to introduce me to her boss, the VP of operations at their parent company. They had manufacturing facilities across the southeast, all of which needed logistics coordination. They'd been unhappy with their current provider and wanted to know if Meridian could handle significantly larger volume. It was the kind of opportunity that could transform my company from a modest success into something substantial. It was also risky. We'd have to hire more staff, expand our infrastructure, take on debt to finance the growth. If we failed, we'd fail spectacularly. I talked to my team. They were all in. We'd built something special together, something worth taking risks for. We landed the contract. It was 10 times larger than anything we'd handled before. We hired 6 new employees, moved into a larger office, and worked insane hours to prove we could deliver. It was terrifying and exhilarating. We delivered, not just adequately, but exceptionally. The parent company's shipments moved more smoothly than they had in years. Costs decreased. Reliability increased. They started referring us to other companies in their network. Meridian grew rapidly but strategically. We never sacrificed service quality for growth. We never cut corners to improve margins. We maintained the principles that had made us successful. Relationships over transactions. Problem solving over protocol. Quality over quantity. 1 year after starting Meridian, We were generating revenue that matched what I'd managed at FreightCor, but we were doing it with 20 employees instead of 80, with dramatically higher profit margins and with almost no client churn. We were building something sustainable. FreightCor, meanwhile, continued to deteriorate. Diana, the CFO, left to join another portfolio company. Kevin was demoted, shifted to a lesser role managing a smaller division. The private equity investors were reportedly looking to sell the company at a loss. Robert, the founder, watched his life's work crumble and reportedly blamed himself for letting the investors take control. I heard that FreightCor approached several of their lost clients about coming back, offering deep discounts and service guarantees. Most declined. Some had moved to Meridian. Others had found different providers. But nobody trusted FreightCor anymore. Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to restore. 18 months after starting Meridian, I received an unexpected call. It was Robert Chen, FreightCor's founder. He asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, curious. We met at a cafe downtown. Robert looked older, tired, diminished from the confident entrepreneur I remembered. "Daniel, thank you for meeting me," he began. "I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For letting them push you out, for not fighting harder to keep you, for letting people who didn't understand the business make decisions about the business." "I appreciate that, Robert, but it's in the past. I'm watching what you've built with Meridian. It's impressive. It's what FreightCor used to be before the investors ruined it." "What's happening with FreightCor now?" He sighed heavily. "The investors are selling. They found a buyer, another private equity firm that specializes in turnarounds. They're buying it at less than half what they paid. Everyone's losing money on the deal except the lawyers and bankers." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. It's what we deserve. We had something good and we destroyed it chasing growth metrics that didn't matter. We had people like you who made everything work, and we treated them like they were replaceable. We learned the hard way that some people aren't replaceable." There it was, the admission, the validation. And sitting across from Robert, hearing him say the words I'd once desperately wanted to hear, I felt nothing. Because I didn't need his validation anymore. I'd built my own validation. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Retire, for real this time. Maybe do some consulting, help founders avoid the mistakes I made. Yeah, I'm mostly just trying to salvage some dignity from this mess." "I hope you find peace with it." He smiled sadly. "You're being generous. You'd be justified in feeling vindicated." "Vindication requires caring about the outcome. I don't care what happens to FreightCor. I care about what happens to Meridian." We finished our coffee and parted cordially. I never saw Robert again. 2 years after starting Meridian, we were approached by a larger logistics company interested in acquiring us. They'd been watching our growth, impressed by our client retention and profit margins. They offered a substantial sum, enough to make me wealthy by any reasonable standard. I considered it seriously. It would be life-changing money. I could pay off every debt, set up my kids' college funds, retire early if I wanted to. But I'd also be giving up something I'd built, something that represented more than just a business. It represented proof that I hadn't been replaceable, that my value wasn't determined by Kevin's assessment or Diana's spreadsheets or Brad's incompetence. I discussed it with Angela and with my team. Angela told me to do whatever made me happy. My team told me they'd support whatever decision I made, but hoped I'd keep building what we'd started. I turned down the acquisition offer. Meridian wasn't for sale. Not yet. Maybe someday, when I was ready to move on to something else, but not while I was still enjoying the work, still learning, still growing. 3 years after starting Meridian, we were one of the most respected mid-sized freight forwarders in the Southeast. We'd built a reputation for reliability, quality, and integrity. Yet we handled logistics for manufacturers, distributors, and importers who valued service over price, relationships over transactions. Freight Corps no longer existed as an independent company. It had been absorbed by the turnaround firm, rebranded, stripped for parts. Kevin had left the industry entirely, taking a corporate job at a non-logistics company. Brad had moved to another city, his logistics career effectively over after the Freight Corps disaster became industry gossip. I occasionally ran into former Freight Corps colleagues at industry events. Some had landed at other companies. Some had struggled to find new positions after being associated with Freight Corps' decline. I helped when I could, providing references or making introductions. May holding no grudges against people who'd just been trying to do their jobs in a dysfunctional environment. The revenge I'd achieved wasn't dramatic. It wasn't public. It wasn't even intentional at first. It was simply building something successful from the ashes of what they'd destroyed, proving through quiet competence that they'd made a catastrophic mistake. The sweetest revenge is success. It's building something valuable that demonstrates conclusively what you're worth. It's creating something that makes your former employer's mistake impossible to ignore or rationalize. They thought I was replaceable because they didn't understand what I did. They saw the surface of my role and believed anyone with logistics experience could do it. They learned that operations management isn't just about following protocols or managing spreadsheets. It's about relationships, institutional knowledge, problem-solving instincts, and the thousand small decisions that keep complex systems running smoothly. You can replace the person. You can never replace what they know, how they work, or who they are in the ecosystem they've built. Kevin and Diana thought they were optimizing for efficiency. Instead, they optimized for disaster. They saved money on paper while destroying the intangible assets that actually made the company valuable. I learned valuable lessons from being fired. I learned that loyalty to a company is often one way. I learned that corporate politics matter more than competence in many organizations. Nay, I learned that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being forced out of a comfortable situation into an uncomfortable opportunity. Most importantly, I learned that your worth isn't determined by who employs you or what title you hold. Your worth is determined by what you can build, what you know, who trusts you, and how you treat people when you have power. Meridian Logistics exists because Freight Corps made a mistake. That mistake cost them millions in lost revenue, destroyed their reputation, and ultimately erased the company from existence. It cost Kevin his career and Diana her credibility, and it gave me the opportunity to build something better than I ever could have built inside someone else's company. They thought I was replaceable. The market proved I was not. That's the only revenge I needed. If you've ever been betrayed at work, you're not alone. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Office Revenge Hub for more powerful workplace revenge stories.